8.1.2 Denial of Service Attacks. So at the end of this lesson, we should be able to define a DOS and a DDoS attack, which stand for Denial of Service and Distributed Denial of Service. And we should also be able to identify some different methods of securing against DOS and DDoS attacks. So in this unit, we're going to look at these four types of attacks: DOS, or a denial of service, spoofing and sniffing, wireless and mobile threats, and then system exploits. So each of these is achieved by manipulating a protocol or a service to behave in a way that was not intended. So there are two ways that an attack can be implemented: on specific software or operating systems, and on specific protocols or services. So on specific software or operating systems, usually this takes advantage of some flaw in code or a user error, and usually these fall into the malware category. On specific protocols or services, this usually takes advantage of the mechanics of protocols or services, which force them to behave in ways that are unintended. So each section of Unit 8 will cover different ways to attack through a protocol or a service. A denial of service attack is when so much traffic is sent to a victim's system that it just collapses. It's in the name, denial of service. So the point of the attack is to make the server unavailable to real users, or to deny them access to the service. So let's think about the CIA triad. Which of the three components of the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, or availability, would a DOS attack threaten? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, it's been a second. A DOS attack or a DOS attack is a threat to availability because we are denying access, right? So in the past, a single attacker could bring down a server, but that's a lot more difficult today. Operating systems and server hardware just are a lot more complicated, and they can almost withstand any amount of traffic that any single system could send. So because of that, DDoS, or distributed denial of service, came into being. So in a DDoS, a lot of devices are used to send traffic. And usually the devices, which we call zombies, are unaware that they're a part of the DDoS because malware was installed that actually makes them part of a botnet. So the SYN flood, this attack we're going to execute by misusing the three-way handshake. So the SYN flood is a typical DDoS. It's an attempt to flood a target with data or requests so that the target network becomes really saturated, and that will result in the loss of legitimate use of the system. In that case, the request is to connect, but since the connection is not completed, the target is left with an overwhelming number of half-open connections. In other words, they're left hanging, right? So that's what the SYN scan is doing. It's asking for a connection, but then it's leaving the receiver hanging. So how can you tell a DDoS is happening? Three ways: sudden and unexpected drop in internet bandwidth, sudden overwhelming number of requests from multiple hosts outside the network, or a sudden drain on the victim's device's resources. It's not totally unusual for a DDoS to happen completely accidentally. Think about those days of the year or certain events that drive a lot of internet traffic, like maybe Cyber Monday shopping or tickets for a Taylor Swift concert, or another popular artist going on sale. If the servers become swamped with a bunch of people trying to connect, then there can be a DDoS with no malicious intent. It just kind of happens. A permanent DDoS happens when the server isn't just overwhelmed, it's totally inoperable. So that's usually the result of somebody getting physical access to the system and doing like physical damage. So then the solution becomes not just thinking about digital security, but also having to consider physical security like door locks and security guards. This is a really fun tool to play around with on your own. You're going to be able to hover over a dot to see the location of a real-time DDoS attack map. You'll be able to get IP addresses and more information about the target. And then when you're actually in the tool, if you use the left toolbar, you can filter by country, source, destination, or type of DDoS. So a DDoS, or a distributed denial of service, those types of attacks happen on a daily basis. They bring down websites, blog posts, and email for a lot of different organizations, and also for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes they want to stop people from seeing information, and their motivation is censorship. Maybe it's a restrictive government that doesn't like critical news articles, or maybe a corrupt company doesn't want an investigative journalist to publish data about their criminal activities. Maybe groups that oversee the fairness of elections are targeted by different campaigns, or the current dictator that's holding on to power. Project Shield is a really cool organization that protects these other types of organizations by providing their huge internet presence. And they basically absorb the fire hose of all of these incoming packets that are being directed at victim organizations in an attempt to bring them offline with a DDoS. So Project Shield is a free service. It's only available to those specific organizations. Corporations or other entities needing this kind of protection have to purchase it. Project Shield is a project from Jigsaw, which is actually a group within Google. And according to Google itself, it says that Jigsaw explores threats to open societies and builds technology that inspires scalable solutions. So unfortunately, DDoS attacks can be purchased. So imagine that you're a small web-based business and a competitor feels that you're too successful. That competitor can actually take you offline with a DDoS, and while you're offline, they can go steal your customers during the time that your website is unresponsive. So you and your web hosting company have to take measures to protect against DDoS attacks, because anybody can be a target. How do you take those measures to protect against DDoS attacks, you ask? Well, here are a couple different ways. One way would be to reduce the timeout value for connections, or in other words, don't wait as long for the ACK packet before giving up and hitting reset. Another way would be to configure the server to have bigger queues, meaning be available for a larger number of connections so that the hanging ones don't shut out new connection attempts. Another way would be to block pings from external sources. There really isn't a good reason why we would want people to be able to ping our systems from outside of the network. So ping is useful as an internal troubleshooting tool. So the best solution is to block the protocol for ping, which is ICMP, so that no responses to any external packets are allowed, and only ICMP is allowed to work inside the network. And then since botnets are the most prevalent method to deliver DDoS attacks, it's every network's responsibility to make sure that we are not a part of the problem. And many companies are actually banding together, power, strength in numbers, to figure out different ways to warn each other and, to create group protections.